All right, so we've been going through this series asking the question, why Israel? And we've talked through, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant. We've talked through the allotment of the land under Joshua. We talked about the judges, the first three kings, not of Orientar. And then we talked about the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. And today we're going to answer the following two questions. Were the exiles of the people of Israel from the land of Israel an afterthought in God's plan? And the second question is, did the return of Israel and Judah under Nehemiah meet the prophetic expectations? And I couldn't figure out if afterthought was one word or two words. Is it two words with a dash, or is it with a dash? Ha-ha! So I was close. Needs a dash. All right. So let's start. Were the exiles afterthoughts? The more that I look at how Adonai has dealt with Israel, the more I realize that God does not see things the same way that I see them. Adonai not only does he deal with people as individuals, but he also deals with people in groups such as family groups or nation groups. Ethnos is family groups, ethnic groups. He deals with nations. And not only is Adonai ever present, but he also deals in generations. Like his perspective, he sees the moment and the instant, but he sees the next 100, 200,000 years. And he measures his actions based upon how he sees things. Now, when we studied through the Mosaic covenant, we saw that there were blessings and chastisements, and these were based upon whether or not the people were going to be faithful. If they were faithful, God would bring blessing. If they were unfaithful, God would bring chastisements. But at the same time, when they're standing at the foot of the mountain, Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, we read this, and we're going to turn there. Leviticus chapter 26, verse 27. And we'll read 26 verses 27 through 33. Yet, if in spite of all this you will not listen to me, but walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you in wrath. I will chastise you 7 times for your sins. You will eat the flesh of your sons and eat the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your high places and cut down your altars of incense. I will cast your dead bodies onto the bodies of your idols. My soul will abhor you. I will lay waste to your cities and devastate your sanctuaries. I will not smell the soothing aromas. I will make the land desolate, and your enemies settling there will be astonished at it. I will scatter you among the nations, and I will draw out the sword after you, so that your land will become a desolation, and your cities will become a waste. Then the land will enjoy its Sabbath rest in all the days of its desolation. Now, I want you to notice the last statement. Your land will become a desolation, and your cities will become a waste. Now, this was spoken by Adonai all the way back at Sinai. You got to think about this. This is the establishment of the nation of Israel. I mean, these people standing at the foot of the mountain, they just walked through the Red Sea. I don't know, and John was mentioning miracles that you've seen. I don't know what you've seen, all of you. But that would be a pretty cool one. It's a hard one to forget. And you got this people, and they're just like, wow, look at what God has done. Look at what God just rescued us out of hundreds of years of slavery, and here we are, and here God is saying, and when you don't listen to me, in the very distant future, you got to remember, God is speaking in thousands of years into the future. Your land will become a waste and will become desolate. But Adonai is not finished. All of Adonai's judgments are redemptive. It's the purpose of them. So he continues. We'll just jump down to verse 40 and we'll pick up. And it says, but, I love that word, but if they confess their iniquity and that of their fathers, in the treachery that they committed against me and how they walked contrary to me, and in return I walked contrary to them and brought them into the land of their enemies, and if at that time their uncircumcised heart becomes humbled, so that they accept the punishment for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and also with my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. But the land will be desolate, deserted by them, and it will enjoy its Shabbatot, while it lies desolate without them. And they will accept the punishment of their iniquity, because they rejected my ordinances, and their soul abhorred my statutes. Yet for all of that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, nor will I hate them into utter destruction and break my covenant with them. For I am Adonai, their God. But for their sake, I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought up out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am Adonai. Chastisement leads to repentance. That's the very point of God's chastisement. Now, when God brings chastisement, he brings it at a national level. You might be a Daniel in the middle of a wicked generation and be crying out and saying, why me? Why is this happening to me? It's not fair. And God says, fair? You don't know the first definition of fair. From God's perspective, the nation is a group, and the nation is being judged for the sins that the nation is committing. So firstly, when God gives all of these chastisements, what's his purpose? His purpose is to bring people to a national confession and repentance. That's the goal. That is the reason for all of these judgments, all of these chastisements. Now, this is no different than what happened in Exodus chapter 2. That's even before all this happened, right? So back when they were in Egypt. In Exodus 2, verse 23, this is an interesting thing. You see, the children of Israel were in Egypt. They were enslaved, and they had actually not sinned to go to Egypt. If you remember, they went to Egypt under Joseph, and they had protection, and God watched over them, and they were enslaved simply because a wicked Pharaoh had risen and taken over. But what do we see? We see now it came about over the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and Bnei Israel groaned because of their slavery. And they cried out, and their cry from slavery went up to God. Their cry from slavery went up to God. And what do we see that happened here? You see, in that case, Adonai raises up a deliverer, Moses, and we see, as we're going through the book of Judges, the same thing happens again and again. The children of Israel, they get beaten by their enemies in some way, then God would raise up a judge, and Adonai does the same thing again and again and again. He's fine. It's good. And so what happens? You see, Adonai allows the enemies of Israel to gain dominion over them, and then he raises up a deliverer to bring their freedom. Repentance leads to remembrance. Adonai states that as Bnei Israel repents, that he will remember. Now, I'm pretty certain that God doesn't forget, at least in the same terminology that we think of. He's not forgetful. However, we are very thankful that Adonai does forget or has a willingness not to remember our sins, just as it says in the new covenant that we read last week in Jeremiah 31:33. God says, "No longer will each neighbor teach his brother, saying, 'Know Adonai, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them.' It is a declaration of Adonai. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more." That's a good sort of forgetfulness. And which covenant does God say that he's going to remember? As we're here in Leviticus chapter 26, which covenant is he going to remember? "I will remember the covenant I made with Jacob, and with Isaac, and with Abraham." Now, we call that the Abrahamic covenant. That's the promise of the land and the people that God made unconditionally. And that is the covenant he's going to remember. So in answer to the question of whether or not the exiles were an afterthought, I will quote from Arnold Fruchtenbaum. He says this: "It is irrelevant whether the Jews are in the land or outside of the land. The land is and always will be theirs. Although Israel's exile out of the land is a result of divine judgment, this does not cancel Israel's title deed to the land, regardless of what any international criminal court justice says. Let God be God and every man a liar." Okay, so there's the answer. The exiles were not an afterthought. They're baked in all the way back at Mount Sinai. Okay, now was Israel's return to the land in the time of Nehemiah and Ezra, was it as glorious as it was expected? Well, we're going to look at a couple different passages here. First of all, let's look at some of the prophetic expectations. So let's look at Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 42. Ezekiel, he was a contemporary with Daniel. So right around that time of Jeremiah, he's seeing things going down. And here's the promise. Chapter 20, Ezekiel 20, verse 42 through 44. "Now you will know that I am Adonai when I bring you into the land of Israel, into the country where I lifted up my hand to give it to your fathers. There you will remember your ways and all of your deeds by which you defiled yourself. You will loathe yourselves for all of the evil that you have done. Then you will know that I am Adonai when I deal with you for my name's sake, and not according to your evil ways and your corrupt deeds, house of Israel. It is a declaration of Adonai." Okay, this is an interesting passage because, first of all, Ezekiel knows full well that the house of Israel, the nation of Israel, had been expelled 100 years before. And so all that's left is the house of Judah, you'd say, but here he's calling them the house of Israel. "You will know that I am the Lord your God when I bring you back into the land of Israel." So the return. We see this return to the land. It was definitely a sign that Adonai's favor was returned. God had remembered the people's cry in captivity. He had remembered them crying out, and therefore they returned. But what do we read in Ezra? Let's go to Ezra chapter 2, verse 64. Okay, this is how many people returned from Babylon. Now you've got to remember that Babylon by this point controlled all of the ancient empire of Assyria. Obviously, it was not just Babylon, it was Persia, which controlled all of Babylon, which controlled all of Assyria. So the entire Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent, was all controlled under one empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. King Cyrus gives the decree that they can all go home, and 42,360 people went home. And it actually breaks it down by tribe. Yes, they still knew the tribes at that time in Ezra's day. And now that number is exactly quoted in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 66. So you got two different witnesses, Nehemiah and Ezra, who obviously were contemporaries, giving the exact number of populations. By the way, just a thing about estimating populations. When you do estimates, to how many digits is the estimate good for? Any mathematicians here? If you're doing an estimate and I say there was 1 million people at our rally, what does that mean? Does it mean 1 million, not 1,000,001, not 999,999? If I say 1 million, what do I mean? It's estimate to the closest million, right? If it could be 1,100,000 or it could be 900,000, that's pretty close to 1 million, right? There's a couple of rallies that I think of. There was a pro-life, there's a pro-life rally in the U.S. every year, and it's usually not televised and not reported on because a couple of years ago they had 2 million people show up in Washington, D.C. That's a lot of people. Now, 2 million, 1,900,000, 2,100,000, give or take. All right. This number, what would this be accurate to? At least to the 10. See, it's to the lowest digit, okay? At least to the 10. Now, this one's actually a summation of a ton of numbers that are accurate to the closest one. If you actually look in how it counts, it was 461 from this tribe, and it was, well, you're like, well, that's pretty accurate, okay? So these numbers are pretty accurate. But if you say, 3 to 4 million, okay. So now you know about estimating. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, well, this exact number is reaffirmed. Now, what was the population in Judah prior to the Babylonian exile? There is a way to estimate it, okay? In the time of Jeremiah, you'll remember that Pharaoh Necho came, actually is in the time of Josiah, right at the beginning of Jeremiah's ministry. Pharaoh Necho comes up to attack Assyria. And they weren't really good friends with Assyria. And then, or actually they were working with Assyria to attack Babylon. It was a little confusing. And Josiah said, no, you're not going to come through our land because we don't like either one of them, and they can go fight their own battle. And Pharaoh Necho's like, listen, I don't have a beef with you. Why are you coming out to fight me? God's told me to go up and fight them. If you come out to fight me, you're going to lose. And sure enough, Josiah dies. Not such a great thing, but after Pharaoh Necho, who wasn't very happy because he just lost a bunch of troops he wasn't expecting to lose, and then he goes up and loses another battle up against Babylon. That was actually Nebuchadnezzar himself was leading the forces. He wasn't king at the time, just crown prince. And so when he comes back in Second Chronicles chapter 36, verses 2 through 4, it says this. Jehoahaz, he was 23 years old, he's the son of Josiah. He became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. Now the king of Egypt deposed him in Jerusalem and imposed a fine upon the land of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And the king of Egypt made Eliakim, his brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and he changed his name to Jehoiakim, but Necho took Jehoahaz, his brother, and carried him down to Egypt. So you might ask, what on earth does that have to do with the population in Israel or Judah, in this case, at the time? Well, let me put it to you this way. There's one word for tribute, there's another word for fine, and they are different, okay? A tribute is just some usually random amount of money that's given when you win a battle. You just ask for all their gold. Give me all your gold and your silver because I just beat you. That's just how it works. But a fine is usually proportional. And it's usually proportional to a population. A fine is, well, let's have a look at it. Let's go to the next slide. 1 talent of gold is about 27 silver talents. So he has 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold. That's about 127 silver talents. Now, 1 silver talent was equal to 3,000 shekels. The normal fine at the time was 1 shekel per person. It happened to be 4 days' wage, so, it's okay. That's not so bad, but it was a very specific amount. 1 shekel per person. That was the fine. It's actually the fine that God sets up in the Bible, too. When they were doing a census, they had to take 1 shekel per person, whether you were rich or poor. And so, if you have 127 silver talents, or 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold, that is 381,000 shekels. Therefore, the population was probably, approximately, 381,000. That's an interesting thought. Now, you can say, well, is there any other evidence in Scriptures to confirm this? Well, it so happens that, yes, there's other bits of evidence we pull out. Remember when David took the illegal census during his time? Now, it was illegal because God hadn't commissioned it, and he didn't take a shekel from each person. There were certain stipulations around taking a census. He just did it to see how big of a king he was at the time, okay? And at the time, specifically said in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 9, that Joab reported the number of the people to the king in Israel, and there was 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and in Judah there was 500,000 men. Now, again, 800,000 looks like an approximation to me, okay? I'm just saying the likelihood that there was not 800,001 people in that census is really low, okay? It's an approximation. Let's just be okay with the approximations. But either way, we see that there's about 500,000 people in Judah in the time of David. Now, we know the northern kingdom, the 800,000 men. Sorry, ladies, you didn't have to pay the fine, right? The men would just, charge the money. That's just how it worked back then. So 800,000 men in Israel, but they had already been taken into exile. What percentage of them were taken? Well, that's what we need to get into. But at least in David's day, which around 970 BC, there was about 500,000 men, and yet in Josiah's day, which is 611 BC, so 350 years later, there's less people? Well, that's not actually unreasonable to believe that. We've got to remember that God had promised that if I am with you, I will bless you. I will bless the fruit of your fields and of your cattle and of your womb. You're going to have lots of kids. If I'm with you, I'm going to bless you and you will have lots of kids. That's actually a huge blessing from God. Blessed is the man who has his quiver filled with children. Okay? That's a blessing from God. We live in a culture today that doesn't like that blessing very much. They think 1 or 2 is a lot. We have friends that have 12, and and she's just fallen pregnant again. So it's not a lot. We come from a family of 6, and I know that might seem like a lot, but it's not a lot. I mean, David had how many siblings? Right? He was number 8, I think. All right? So the point is, when God poured out his blessing on the children of Israel, one of the ways you saw it is by having lots of kids. But when they were not following God, what does God say? Well, you're not going to be blessed in the field, you're not going to be blessed in the cattle, and your womb will not be blessed. So it is reasonable to say that there would be less people when God's hand of blessing is not upon the nation. Where on earth am I going with all this? Where are you going with this? Well, oh, look at that. I don't know. Where am I going with this? We don't know what percentage of the people who were taken off in captivity. There's things we just don't know. They just weren't recorded. What we do know is from Jeremiah 39, verse 10, that Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, he left some of the poorest of the people who had nothing behind in the land of Judah, and he gave them the vineyards and the fields in that day. Now, let's just be generous. Let's say that Nebuzaradan left 20% of the population, and he only took 80%. So the lowest 20% of the population, the poorest, right? Let's say he left 20%. Well, that means 80% was about 300,000 that were taken off into captivity. When Judah went into captivity, we see give or take, 300,000 went off into captivity. Now, how many people returned in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah? 42,360. Now, with that sort of picture in your head, does that sound glorious to you? Or does it sound like a little trickle? It's like we left with 300,000, we came back with just 42,000. I don't know. It doesn't seem to match with all the blessings that God is declaring, and He's saying, this is blessing. And you know what? The people actually saw that and recognized it in that time. One of the prophets who was alive at the return, so with Ezra and Nehemiah, was a man by the name of Haggai. Haggai says this. It was on the 21st day of the 7th month when the word of Adonai came through Haggai the prophet. He says, speak to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the Kohen Gadol, and to the remnant of the people. You see, it's just a remnant of the people. He says this, who remains among you who saw this house in its former glory? So how do you see it now? Does it not seem as nothing in comparison in your eyes? But now, Zerubbabel, Chazak, it is a declaration of Adonai, and be strong. Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, Kohen Gadol, and all the people of the land. Chazak means be strengthened. It is a declaration of Adonai, and work, for I am with you. It's a declaration of Adonai Tzavaot, according to the word that I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt. That's hundreds and hundreds of years ago. My Ruach is standing in your midst. Do not fear, for thus says Adonai Tzavaot, in just a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations. The treasures of all the nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says Adonai Tzavaot. The silver is mine, the gold is mine. It is a declaration of Adonai. The glory of this latter house will be greater than the former, says Adonai Tzavaot. In this place I will grant shalom. It is a declaration of Adonai Tzavaot. So you got to remember, when the people come back, there's no temple. It had been wiped out, been burned to the ground. And so they come back and they build their houses, they build the walls of Jerusalem under Nehemiah, and then they build whatever they could build for the temple. And what is their feeling? Well, Haggai pretty much expresses it. He's like, look at the house we built. Does it look anything as glorious as the house that Solomon built, the temple of Solomon? The open and obvious answer is no, it was so much smaller, so much less. There was no gold crown. A crown of gold was literally the huge embattlements that were around the building were made of solid gold in Solomon's time. The doors were inlaid with gold. I mean, the entire interior of the building was covered with gold. There were these two massive, it was huge, massive, like they were talking about, like 3 times the height of a man, these angelic beings that were just covered in gold in the temple. And they've got no gold. They've now got no silver. They literally said in Solomon's day the silver was so much that it couldn't be counted. They didn't have that huge brass or bronze sea on 12. It was like the size of this on 12 massive cows made of solid bronze. It was a palm thick of bronze, right? They literally had to cut it into pieces when they took it away in the exile. But they had none of that. And they didn't even have the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't have a golden showbread or a golden menorah. They had nothing. You can just imagine the people, they're coming back with literally the money in their pockets. And they're saying, how is the glory of this house going to be greater than the glory of the first one? So how was it greater? That's the question, right? How on earth was the second temple greater than the glory of the first temple? Well, at the same time, there's another prophet. He's a man by the name of Zechariah. Zechariah, and we'll just turn there. Zechariah chapter 6. Zechariah chapter 6, verse 11. Take the silver and the gold and make a crown and set it on Joshua the son of Jehozadak, the Kohen Gadol. So same guy that Haggai was talking about. And speak to him, saying, Thus says Adonai Tzabaoth, Behold, a man whose name is the branch will branch out from this place and build the temple of Adonai. He will build the temple of Adonai. He will bear splendor and sit and rule on his throne. Thus he will be a Kohen on his throne, a priest on his throne. So the council of Shalom will be between them both. So here's Zechariah. He's standing in front of the same temple that Haggai is saying, yeah, I know it doesn't look great, but the glory of this house is going to be greater. God's about to shake the heavens, and he's about to bring this glory into this house. And here's Zechariah also looking at the same people, and they make this little crown. They stick it on a priest's head. Crowns go on kings, right? But he says, you represent someone who's coming, Joshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. You're a priest with a crown. There's a man coming, the branch, we call him the branch, just for fun, and he's coming, and he's going to be a priest on his throne. He's going to have two of these roles, priestly, kingly roles. So just as a side note, did that possibly happen to in this second temple? Did a guy whose name was the branch come? Well, not really. But there was a guy who was a son of David. And Matthew writes about him in chapter 2, verse 23. And he says this, talking of Yeshua, he says, when he grew up and he went down to Egypt, he was chased around. They tried to kill him. They didn't. Let's eat. And then so when he got up, they got out of Egypt, and they said, they went up to Nazareth, to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, that Yeshua will be called a Nazari. Now, I would bet that none of you have read that prophecy where Yeshua, or even the Messiah, is called a Nazari. Have you ever seen any scripture? I mean, what good thing can come from Nazareth? That was the saying at the time. What good thing can come from Nazareth? Well, there's a little footnote in my Bible, and it says that the word Nazareth comes from the root word netzer, which means shoot or branch. Now, it also refers me back to Isaiah 11, verse 1. Now, Isaiah 11, verse 1 happens to be the same passage that Zechariah is quoting from. Isaiah 11, 1, Isaiah was a contemporary of Jeremiah, or just before Jeremiah. It says, then a shoot will come out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch will bear fruit out of its roots. So you got shoot, which is a netzar, and branch, which is, I'm looking at my wife. I had it written down, and I meant to have it up there. Yatzer, I believe it is branch. But you've got shoot and a branch, and a man by the name of the branch. And what Matthew's saying is like, wow, look at this. The branch, he grew up in Shoot Town. What do you know about that? The branch grew up in Branch Town. That's hilarious. And he writes it in there. And unless you know the prophecies and multiple prophecies, you won't recognize that the branch becomes to be known as the name, the title of the Messiah. A branch is coming. And this takes me back to Zechariah, right? Okay, so the word talking to Zechariah literally takes a crown, sticks it on the head of a guy by the name of Yehoshua, and says, you represent a guy by the name of the branch who's going to be a son of David, who's going to be a king and a priest. Now, just so you know, the name Yehoshua By that time in history, just after the return from Babylon, they dropped the hay, the first hay. So if you go Yehoshua, what happens when you drop the H? Just saying. Yeshua is what you get, just so that for people who are watching online that may not have walked with us for a little bit of time. But Adonai continues to speak through Zechariah. Let's go on. In Zechariah chapter 8, then the word of Adonai came, saying, Thus says Adonai Tzavaot, I am exceedingly zealous for Zion. How many have sung that song? I am zealous for Zion. Exceedingly zealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy for her. Thus says Adonai, I will return to Zion and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem will be called the city of truth and the mountain of Adonai Tzavaot, and he will be called the holy mountain. Thus says Adonai Tzavaot, once again old men and old women will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with his staff in his hand because of his age. And the streets of the city will be filled with boys and girls playing in the streets. See, this is Zechariah. He's looking at just the 40-some-odd thousand people that have come back. And he's saying, listen, God is zealous for this place. A day is coming when it's just going to be so peaceful that old guys and old ladies can just sit there just outside having a tea and coffee, and just sitting there, and all the kids are just running around in Jerusalem because it's safe enough to do so. And this is exactly what we see today. But I would also note that that's what they saw in Yeshua's day as well. By that point in time, there were enough people to sit in the streets. Now, at the time of Yeshua, by the time we get to Yeshua, there's about 600,000 people living in Jerusalem. If you want to go by the number that the Roman historian Tacitus uses. But he's kind of quoting from Josephus, and Josephus was kind of one of those, there's 3 to 4 million people in the country. You're like, 3 to 4 million? I mean, pick one. I mean, there's a big difference. I'm just saying, pick one. And Josephus is known for kind of exaggerating the numbers. I would just say just generalizing the numbers. So do you go with the 600,000? Or some people say, there's only 40,000 people in Jerusalem. I'm like, no, I think that there may have been more like 100,000 in the city and then people in the surrounding area. And depend on where you draw that circle around Jerusalem, how many people are included there. But that's for another question. We're going to deal with that next week. And I have some details if you want to have a look at that. But let's look at some archaeological evidence. Now, I got a pointy thing. Yes. This is a good eBay purchase. Yeah, $5. So no, it worked really well. It just so happened to show up in my mailbox this morning, which was really, really nice. Okay, so let's have a look at some archaeological evidence. Now, the closer we get to the time, the more evidence there is. Now, last time I said, there was this stone, and I forgot to put it up there. It is the Menashe Stele, or the Moabite stone. Now, what's interesting about this one, this was the story back in the book of Judges, where Manasseh comes up and builds up this fighting force to come against Gilead, okay? And God raises up a judge and defeats it. Now, what's interesting is that Manasseh, obviously, he beat a bunch of cities that had been Israeli cities, or Jewish cities, those are both anachronistic. They had been Hebrew cities, and the cities of the northern tribe of Israel. That's in Joshua's time. Man, I'm not getting my time frames. Point is, he actually records the name of Yud-He Vav-He, the name of the God of Israel, and he says that I beat the God of Israel. I beat the God of Israel. Of course, he was a little, he got this all carved in stone, as you do when you win 2 or 3 cities. He's like, look at me, and Chemosh, my God, he beat the God of Israel, and then God raises up a judge and says, don't think so. Whoosh! And Moab's wiped out. That was actually the time when Moab was literally sowed with salt and stones. Well, sowed with stones. They would tore the stones down from the cities and threw them into the open fields. All that hard work of plowing your field. But there's the name of God. Name of God in a stone carved in rock. Do the rocks cry out? Do the rocks cry out? Wait, let's go to the next one. All right, King Jehoiachin. So this is at the end. So we know that King Jehoiachin was taken off in the first exile to Babylon. That's the first exile of Judah into Babylon. Okay? So that was when Daniel and his mates all got shipped off there. The rich and the wealthy and the royalty all got taken over to Babylon. That was at the same time that Jehoiachin was there. And in this cuneiform stone, there's actually it notes or says that to this guy, this King Jehoiakim of Judah, the king of Judah, he was given this much oil and this much flour on a daily basis. So it's like, yeah, we beat you, and this is how much you're going to get to eat. There's your food allotment. It's like a grocery receipt. Grocery receipt carved in stone that points out to the Babylonian captivity. All right, let's go on to the next one. Does anybody know what this might be? Part of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Absolutely. This is a part of the Isaiah scroll. One of the major things that happens in this time is, the Israel's growing now after they've come back from captivity, and they build all these communities, and there's growth, and we'll talk about more of it later. But one of the things that was done just before Yeshua came was this little community in Qumran. It was this Assyrian community, and they had a habit for, they were scribes. So they were literally taking an old version that was broken up. Like you'd take this old version that's all got torn up, and you'd be, word by word, letter by letter, transcribing onto a new parchment. And they kept these parchments. Now, they knew stuff was going down. I mean, the Romans would be coming in every once in a while, and just there was this turmoil, and so much for it being really peaceful during Yeshua's time. I mean, there were people being crucified because of riots and uprisings, and it was not a peaceful time. We don't always read all of that, but you got to remember, of Yeshua's disciples, one of them was a zealot. That means he was there to fight Rome. One of them was a tax collector. He was there to work for Rome. In the normal days, they would kill each other, right? So Jesus is amazing. He gets people from everywhere. But this scroll, this is amazing because when we talk of the scriptures and with the reliability of scripture, we have fragments from the Qumran documents for every single book in the Hebrew scriptures except for one, and that's the book of Esther, right? But every other book we have fragments. Now with Isaiah, we have the entire book. The entire book. Now, here's the other question, and I'm sorry for any Muslims that might be listening to this, but one of the biggest claims that Muslims have is that the scriptures have been corrupted. That the Old Testament and the New Testament, which they call the Injil, that they have been corrupted over time. They have been changed. All right? They've been changed over time. Here's the problem. The book of Isaiah is word for word what we have today, that we're translating from today. The Masoretic texts, which were from the 1000s, they were 1,000 years later than this. This is now the earliest version that we have, the Qumran documents. Now, for a lot of the other books in the Bible, there are just fragments because the scrolls were destroyed. This is what happens. People get greedy. They found the scrolls, and so they found a couple of them fully intact, and then they found other pieces, and then they figured out, if we break this up into pieces, we get more money by selling it off in pieces than we do selling it off at one big, you sell off the Isaiah scroll, you get $100,000. You break it into 100,000 pieces, you get 10 times that. Well, at that point, Israel finally, this was actually discovered in 1948. Israel came in and set up this antiquities group, and they basically, we're not paying any more money. Just give it to us. You have to give it to us. They basically said those are national treasures, and you don't get to keep them, and you don't get any money. So I am sorry, if you're going treasure hunting in Israel, and you find something that's really cool, you'll get your name printed, and you won't get any money. But that's just the way it is, okay? So unfortunately, we only have fragments for a lot of the other books. But in every way that those fragments can, they demonstrate that the text we have today is word for word accurate to what it was back then. So for the Muslims who think that the scripture has been corrupted, this is a problem. Prove it. It's real simple. Just prove it. Show me where the corruption is. Show me where the change is. Show me where we added in miraculous stories that weren't there in the original. We've got something that's 2,000 years old that shows that it hasn't changed. That's a little awkward. So the Isaiah scroll, just probably one of the greatest, I would say the greatest discoveries, archaeological discoveries of all time, because it demonstrates the faithfulness of God. And one of the things I love about Isaiah scroll, Isaiah chapter 66, the last chapter, can a nation be born in a day? And it's discovered in 1948. I'm just saying God has a great sense of humor. All right. The next one that I want to point out today, and there's so many other discoveries, is the Temple Mount. This is an archaeological demonstration of huge magnitude, and it's in plain sight, right? So when we say that it's rags and rocks, archaeology is just rags and rocks, that's a pretty big rock. Those are a lot of rocks, and they are screaming out. So what we see here we go, I'll get to use the pointy thing. So there's the eastern gate, so more than likely the temple was actually directly east of this, so probably located right here. Not where the Dome of the Rock is, but actually right next to it. Okay? In fact, there's this little thing that's kind of back behind this little thing right there. I'll point it out right there. That's actually where they think the Holy of Holies might have been. So you can see it's a little off to the side. Makes me think that if man gets his hands on it, they might build a third temple right next to the Dome of the Rock and call it all good. Just saying they might do it. I don't know. But if they get the opportunity, they might. They'll be like, then it'd be peace for all religions, right? Now, hey, look, it could be a good thing. Look, the Antichrist has to defile something. So, I'm just saying. But the point is I don't think that God's pretty impressed about that sort of stuff. I don't think he shares glory with any other gods. Okay? He's not that kind of, he's just not like that. This live and let live stuff, you won't see that in God's character. It's my way or the highway. That's how God deals. And he deals with it in nations and in the national terms. He says, if your nation's going to depart from me, this is how I deal with my nation. And you want to come, and this is another thing that I just want to point out. We have certain in-house debates. Like I am heartbroken over Israel because I see the sin and I see God bringing in the chastisement almost immediately. And I'm like, how could you go and set up a new idol at a Nova festival and think that was a good plan? Right? Don't you remember a golden calf? Pretty sure that happened. But here's the other problem. You also don't want to be the enemy of God's people. So the good example is if you have a kid and he's acting up, and as a parent, you come in and you bring correction. Let's say one of your other kids comes in and sees that you're getting on. I'll use my son and daughter because they're not here today. So Jonathan and Abigail. Let's just say that I'm correcting Jonathan, and then Abigail sees that she should just correct Jonathan too. Now, what will happen to me when I'm in the middle of correcting Jonathan? I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but the anger that's going towards my son all of a sudden turns to face the other. I'm like, get out of this. This has nothing to do with you. No, you've never experienced that. Okay, it's just me. All right, okay, so I have done that before, okay? I've done that before. But God is very, very clear. He says, if I'm bringing judgment on a nation, don't rejoice, because I might actually reduce the judgment on them because you started rejoicing. Because it's not about you, it's about me and them, and we're dealing with something. And that is with God and Israel, and it is with God and the other nations. We should never rejoice when somebody else is getting punished, because God just might have all that wrath and be like, what do you think you're doing? Get out of it. This has nothing to do with you. But if you keep doing it, then we will have a problem, won't we? Just saying. Just saying. Okay. That's the warning to the surrounding nations who might think, oh, now's a good time to set up a two-state solution. Let me just give you a warning. God says very clearly that he will come into judgment against any nation that seeks to divide Israel. Now, you see these great buildings. This is what Yeshua. Let's go to the next one. Next slide. This is another interesting one. So this is this is a model, a scaled model. There's the Eastern Gate. So go back to the previous one. So there's the Eastern Gate over here. Eastern Gate's over here. As you can see, they've extended it quite a ways out this way. So all this is new. I say new, 600 years new. Pretty new in terms of history time. And then go to the next one. And you can see that at the time it ended here and it was much lower there. And Solomon had his portico out here. It wasn't Solomon's portico. This is actually, there's the temple that they built after Nehemiah and Ezra came in. And then, of course, you had King Herod, and he was a great architect. So he kind of built all these fortifications around. He built this portico, called it Solomon's portico. It wasn't Solomon's portico, but it was Herod's portico, and he named it after Solomon because he was, he was a good architect, and everybody loved it, and he liked being loved, or at least liked people loving what he built. And so he just kept building and stuff. But there's that Eastern Gate. And you can see the temple lines up straight behind it. Go back to the previous one. You see what I'm saying? There's the Eastern Gate. Could all fit right in there. And this is interesting because Yeshua was up there. Let's go back to the previous one. Oh, that one. No. You were right. So Yeshua is up there, standing up here, and then they're like, wow, look at all these buildings. This is so great. And Yeshua turns and says, you see these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left upon another. Every one will be torn down. So you look at this building, that's pretty cool. You look at all these fortifications, those buildings were pretty cool. There's buildings at the back. All of this was filled with buildings. Now go to the previous one. It was flattened. Every stone of every building up there. First of all, they burned it and it melted whatever gold was in there, and it kind of went between the cracks of the rocks. And then they were like, oh, bother. How do we get the gold out? We tear down every stone. And every stone was literally torn down, and they actually excavate these down here. There's massive stones just sitting down here, all the way down here. They kind of rolled down into the valley down here. There's the western wall over there. But, there's massive stones all around here. They've even got the crown of the temple. Go back to the other one. So the crown being right up here, that's right at the top of the temple. There's those massive stones that have obviously been carved and made beautiful for the top of the building. Let's conclude. In covering this time of the first exile and the return of the people of Israel, we see that the message of Adonai does not change. Instead, he reiterates the covenants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through the prophets of Zechariah and Haggai. So regardless of whether or not the people of Israel are living in the land of Israel, Adonai is still zealous over Zion. And next week, we're going to talk about the time of Yeshua and the second exile. We'll ask, is the second exile any different from the first?